There are people out there all across the country pushing boundaries to grow the game of golf. Like champion speed golfer Lauren Cupp, who plays faster than anyone else. And Will Lowry, whose work in the golf community inspires more kids to get into the game. As a champion partner of the Masters, Bank of America supports everyone determined to find out what's possible. In golf and in life. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America. Bank of America N.A. member FDIC, copyright 2025, Bank of America Corporation, all rights reserved.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Buckeye Talk is about to begin. Hey, 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 come on in.
Welcome into Buckeye Talk. I'm Stefan Krajisnik. That's Andrew Gillis. We're back talking to you some more after Ohio State, finished up their spring game and gets moving into the offseason here. And it's portal time again, Andrew. You thought the transfer portal season was over. It's not. The spring portal is here as you're listening on Wednesday morning. The portal is open, and it's open, I believe, through the 25th for players to inform their current teams that they want to leave. Obviously, if you commit in May, you can commit in May. But as long as you tell your team within this next 10 or so days that your intentions of entering the portal, then you can go. And it adds for some interesting offseason movement here, roster movement, because Nico Iamaleava showed us that some guys who entered the portal are very important to their teams. And then there's going to be other guys who entered the portal and maybe they're younger guys who had futures that are no longer with your team, or just guys who didn't have a big role in kind of late end of their career. And we'll see what happens there. Make sure to get the text 614-350-3315, 2-week free trial. We're going to have all the portal news. That's where we're going to go first with it. If anyone from Ohio State enters or if anyone commits to Ohio State, that's the first place we're going to go is the text. So make sure to subscribe there. Gillis, we're kind of having a basic conversation here of things that we've hinted at maybe throughout the spring, places that Ohio State needs depth. Let's start with this. Is there any position that you think Ohio State would go after a starter in the spring portal window? And some of that might depend, obviously, on someone being good enough and to enter the portal window, because there's a lot of times where you got a Josh Simmons who's maybe not ready day one to play for you, but down the road he's good enough. But is there any position where you say, okay, if there's a good enough prospect, he could start for Ohio State?
The two positions that kind of come to mind are safety opposite Caleb Downs. What was the kid who committed to Oregon from Purdue? Thieneman, was that his name? If a kid like that comes out, if you look at somebody and go, you know what, this is just a player that we can't pass up. Like it's obviously the spring portal window, which is kind of tampered down from the winter portal window as it is. So, there's not going to be a Caleb Downs in the portal. I mean, there's not really a Caleb Downs just in general. But if a kid like Thieneman or whatever, like if he were to enter the portal at safety, I think you have to explore it. Just because, you can like what you have with Hartford, who seems to be the projected starter there. That would intrigue me. And I don't think defensive end is crazy right now. If there's a good enough defensive end out there, I know I saw there was somebody from Liberty who just entered the portal. Like, if there's a good enough defensive end that you think can start, that to me would be an interesting proposition. But otherwise, I mean, we've talked about this. Like, we talked about this last year. Like, with the offensive line, it was, I mean, if you can find somebody, take them. But I don't know if you're going to find anybody. I'm kind of in that same boat. I don't think you're going to find anybody with defensive end. I don't think you're going to find anybody with safety. But those two positions as starters would not stun me.
Yeah, safety I agree with. Like Thieneman is definitely the perfect example of, I don't know if Ohio State was necessarily in need of a safety when the portal opened in the winter, but once his name came up, you could see why the Buckeyes would go after him and why a team like Oregon would go after him. Defensive end is interesting. It's maybe a position we'll talk about where they could maybe use some depth. I feel like they're kind of sold on Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson to where I don't know if realistically you would find a better option than them in the portal. It would be interesting. It would be interesting. So let's talk about some positions where there's maybe needs. Ryan Day talked about the spring portal window after the spring game, basically saying that, throughout the spring and now especially with the spring being over, you kind of assess what you have, whether it be starting spots or depth, and you kind of fill in where you need, using this portal. I guess I kind of compare more to like a waiver wire, the spring portal window, than like free. Like the winter window to me is like very much free agency. There's a bunch of guys in there. You're paying guys, like you're going to be paying guys in the spring too, but there's fewer options. It kind of seems like you're kind of just filling positional needs. It feels a bit like a waiver thing where if someone comes up that you could use, maybe you go out and get them. I think let's start with the obvious one. We harped on it a bit after rewatching the spring game. They need depth at defensive tackle because Will Smith, Jason Moore, Tywan Malone, I don't think it's panning out as quick as they've kind of needed it to this spring. And when Ryan Day tells us at the start of the spring that it's maybe a position of need, and then I asked him about it a few weeks later, and he wasn't, very persuasive, and I don't think he was trying to be persuasive in talking about that unit and still needing depth. And I think as we finished the spring and we saw what happened to the second unit defensive line in the spring game, they got to go out and get someone in the transfer portal at defensive tackle. There's a kid from Miami who just entered. We were texting about him yesterday, Joshua Horton, a defensive lineman from Miami. I think he's a second-year player, maybe a third-year player. He's got 3 years of eligibility left. He's 295. That kind of player, I'm not saying they're going to go after him specifically, but that type of player is intriguing to me because right now you just need him to be good enough to be a backup. And I think maybe he could be, but you get 3 years of him, and that's kind of intriguing when you look at the future of this room. Are there a lot of young defensive tackles that you're looking at right now saying, okay, next year, because I think there's a chance you get Edric back definitely, and Caden McDonald back next season. Like, even if they come back, what's your depth look like in that room? It's kind of sparse when you look at this moving forward. So I feel like a guy like that, who maybe is similar to like a Josh Simmons, where you get a few years of him, is not the worst thing, especially if he can give you enough as a backup in 2025.
Yeah, and that to me is the interesting part here, because it's not just that we're looking at this unit going, oh, well, you need bodies. The unfortunate part about Ohio State's defensive tackle depth is they kind of have bodies. And Caden McDonald and Edric Houston are your starting nose and 3-tech. And then you have Tywan Malone, Jason Moore, Will Smith Jr., Eric Mensah. Those are the non-freshmen in the room. That's 6. And if you want to say, we got to go get a 5th, or we got to go get a 6th, somebody that long-term, okay, then that's a fine place to be. But I don't know if they have a set 3 or 4 right now. And this is not us necessarily just pontificating saying, wow, the defensive tackle depth isn't where it needs to be. This is Ryan Day. And Ryan Day had said a few times, we need guys to step up. And, I'm starting to kind of learn the nuances, I'm sure you are, of Ryan Day and what he means. And when he says we're going to have to take a hard look at it, like he did when asked about going into the portal for defensive tackles, it kind of means they're doing it. It kind of means they are taking a hard look at it. He talked about seeing flashes from these defensive linemen, but not seeing enough. Like, you've got a handful of guys in that mix, and you don't really have an answer. And that, to me, is the interesting part. I'm wondering if we see a departure or two from that unit. If we see a player leave, if, somebody or somebody's get brought in on the defensive tackle, just because, we saw it. And I think it's kind of one of those things where Ohio State fans should be very, very happy with the offensive line, but you also kind of need to turn around and say, well, why wasn't there a little bit more pushback from the defensive line? Like that, interesting. And, maybe if the defensive line had dominated, everybody would be saying, well, Tyler Bowen, and he can't coach, and our new guys are terrible, and blah, blah, blah. So I get it. I get how this might sound to some people, but you need a big body in that group. I look at that unit and I see a group of guys, like you need a 300-pounder, like another, like probably like 315 body type to put in the middle, because who's the backup to Caden McDonald? Who's the true backup? I don't think you have one. And if we're talking about this team, and Steven has kind of talked about this team doing really unique 3-4 looks and 3-3-5 looks and 3-down fronts and unique fronts. And as we talked about at the end of the 2024 regular season, diversifying your fronts and diversifying your defensive packages. Okay, if you're going to do that, you can't just have one guy, because after him, I don't know if you have a true nose. And that's where it gets scary, because, we saw early in last season, Tyleik Williams got banged up. He was probably good enough to play against Michigan State. And I think he missed the Western Michigan game too. And they were like, you know what, man, don't worry about it. Just get back for Iowa. And then we'll ramp you up for Iowa. That was really the only injury that I can remember them significantly having in early in the season and really throughout the year. I mean, Tyleik Williams, Ty Hamilton, they didn't really leave the lineup after that. So what happens if that happens? And I don't think you like the answer if you're Ohio State.
So let me pose this question, because I think we're both in agreement that it's definitely a position of need, and you got to go get depth. But if there's not anyone in the portal that is good enough, or let's say they just don't land anyone, right? Like there could be a guy who's good enough and he goes to Oregon. We see what they do on the recruiting trail. Like this is all feasible. What is your confidence level? We'll do 1 to 10. That one of these guys, Will Smith, Tywone Malo, or Jason Moore, I think those are kind of the big three that we look at. What is your confidence on 1 to 10 that one of them can make the strides? Because I'll say this, even if you do go get someone in the portal, I still think one of those guys has to step up for you, because you have to be 4 deep there. And I don't think you're getting 2 guys that are good enough in the portal. You might get 1. So what is your confidence that one of those guys can emerge? Because you're going to need it.
That's a good question. Look at you playing podcast host, asking good questions. Probably at like a 5, but kind of like right in the middle, because the thing that scares me is that, like, Tywone Malone, I mean, he's a 5th-year senior. He kind of is what he is at this point. He's a reserve defensive lineman for Ohio State. Jason Moore and Will Smith Jr., this is supposed to be the jump.
Yeah. And
I know Ohio State brings in elite level recruits, and, if you're a top, Stephen brings this up a lot, and he's not necessarily wrong to say this, but it's, if you're a top 50 recruit or top 100 recruit, you should be ready to go year 2. You should be blah, blah, blah. And he's not necessarily wrong, but some guys, especially at the lines, might take another year. It is concerning to me that we are in this world of Jason Moore and Will Smith Jr. going, hey, this was supposed to be it. Like, Steven brought this up on the podcast. I've invoked his name a couple of times now. He will be back soon.
His spirit is always on the pod.
Spirit lives on. We're not even talking about receivers, which on the Transfer Portal podcast, we're not going to talk about receivers.
No.
So he said, this is a guy who, in his freshman year, should be getting 10 snaps a game, because he just looks like one of those defensive linemen. Think about how big some of these linemen are at Georgia and at Alabama and at LSU and at all these other programs. Like the SEC defensive lines, obviously, they're the famed, these guys are 340 pounds. Florida has a 400-pounder on their defensive line. They talk about how big these guys are. Jason Moore looks like that. 6'5", over 300 pounds. This guy looks like one of those dudes. And to have Ryan Day basically come out and say, we need to look hard at going into the portal for defensive tackles, it worries me because Cade McDonald and Jason Moore, or Cade McDonald and Edric Houston, that should be your starting tandem. But you should, at this point, be feeling really good about at least two of Tywone Malone, Jason Moore, Will Smith Jr., and it doesn't sound like that's the case.
Yeah, it feels like it's going from a recruiting conversation to more of a developmental conversation of why haven't one of these guys emerged. It's intriguing. It's intriguing. And I think that's what makes this conversation interesting is I firmly believe that if you get one guy from the portal, you still need one of those three to step up. And like you said, maybe one of those three leaves. If you do get a guy from the portal, who knows? We'll see what happens. I can't imagine all three of them leave, and one of them is going to have to step up for you. So it's by far, I think, the biggest position of need in the portal in terms of depth, because I think you can get guys who are good enough to be a backup at Ohio State. I don't think you're going to get someone that's better than Kaden McDonald or Edric Houston, but I think you can get someone who's definitely the third best defensive tackle on this roster. So we'll see. Like you said, maybe they change up the defensive fronts a bit. Maybe, you have to work around it. I mean, if that's the reality, I think Steven talked about it a few pods ago, like in college football, your scheme has to fit what your roster has, what your strengths are. And you need to mitigate your weaknesses. And if that's a weakness, then they got to do ways to work around it, because just doing a four-man front is going to be very difficult to maintain if you were not very trusting of your depth at defensive tackle. And think about some of the teams that they face. Texas right away is going to be a big test for your interior defensive line. Michigan is always a huge test on your interior defensive line. We saw you got into the playoffs, and Tennessee, even with Josh Heupel, was a very run-heavy team, had a lot of success running the ball. That's who you had to face. You faced Notre Dame in a national championship game. Like, think about what Penn State's roster is going to be this year. Yeah, they got Drew Allard, but what do they have at receiver compared to what they have at running back? Your schedule is going to test your interior defensive line depth. You better be ready for it.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. These defensive line, it's a load management question too, because one of the things that I want to be like, one of the things that I think we have done, and I hope we've done it enough, is praise Ohio State for how they managed the season last year. Not just, they won the national championship, they're really good, but the whole playing slow type of concept. I mean, outside of Josh Simmons having a weird knee injury and Seth McLaughlin tearing his Achilles at practice, which are just kind of weird fluke kind of injuries.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it's injuries.
Yeah, there really wasn't a ton of, oh my goodness, this is a mess on the injury list, right? Like, there weren't weeks where you went in going, Ohio State's kind of the walking wounded here, and that's a credit to the coaching staff and a credit to the training staff. One of the reasons that was the case is because they were able to get guys off their feet. Like, Ty Hamilton and Tyleik Williams per PFF were 9th and 11th on the defense in snaps. Like, Caleb Downs led the defense in snaps with 917. Ty Hamilton, 669. So that's over 200 snaps that Ty Hamilton was not on the field that Caleb Downs was. And Tyleik Williams, I know he was injured a little bit. He only played 586. I know he only played 13 games. So he's probably up on that same level that Ty Hamilton is. But, like, this is a position that you need to rotate, right? This is a position that you need to kind of have guys at. Caden McDonald played 216. Edric Houston played 141. Hiru Kanu played 124. The question right now, to me, do you feel confident that Tywone Malone, Jason Moore, and Will Smith Jr. can give you, let's say they play 16 games again, just for keeping the numbers straight, 216, 141, and 124. Do you think they can give you high-quality snaps at that number of snaps? Right now, you're at least worried about it.
Yeah, no doubt. What's interesting, too, is you had a luxury last year, and Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton also haven't played a lot of football. I think we're both in agreement that Edric Houston and Kaden McDonald are all Big Ten, maybe even all American caliber guys, they haven't played a ton of football, right? Like I think you're going to have to play them a little more early in the season than you did Tyleek and Ty. Like, I don't know if those guys can. Like, I don't know, when you get through like Grambling and Ohio, are you fine if Edric Houston just doesn't play the entire second half? Does he need those reps of 11-on-11 football before you get into the heart of the Big Ten schedule? These aren't guys that have played a ton of football. They're even the starters who we think are good are young and have bigger roles to step into. They even talked about it. Like, this team has a lot of returning guys, but even a guy like Brandon Innes is stepping into a bigger role. Caden McDonald is stepping into a bigger role because they're starters now, and that's a whole different thing you got to manage. So it's going to be interesting. Let's take our first break, and we're going to come back and keep talking about positions that Ohio State could address in the spring portal window. And welcome back to Buckeye Talk. We're talking spring portal window. Any news that breaks on the portal front, we'll be texting 614-350-3315. 2-week free trial. Make sure to join in and get all your news there. Recruiting stuff coming up, Andrew. I know there's a ton of camps, a million different things that are about to start coming up in recruiting, commitments, probably, who knows? People flip, people change their mind, people decommit. A lot of stuff that could be coming over the course of this summer. Make sure to keep everything up with everything there on the text. Gillis, I think, is hoping that there's no flips or anything because that makes his job a lot harder.
Well, as we were breaking, Ohio State earned the commitment of a 4-star receiver from South Lake Carroll in Texas who flipped his commitment from TCU. Brock Boyd, 4-star receiver, number 374 overall, number 58 wide receiver in the class per the 247 composite. 6'1", 165. This is a nice commitment for Ohio State. He is the third receiver in the class. Joins obviously 5-star Chris Henry Jr. and he joins 4-star Jaden Ricketts. Ricketts obviously being an Ohio kid. Chris Henry Jr. was an Ohio kid, now attends Mater Dei out in California. Now you get Brock Boyd into the class. Boyd, like I said, he attends South Lake Carroll. Ohio State had been kind of poking around here for a while. It felt like for a little bit that Boyd was kind of nearing a decision to either entertain this or make the flip. And obviously, like I said, Ohio State was kind of after him. So yeah, he, this is a nice signing for Ohio State, or I should say a nice commitment for Ohio State. But again, this is one of those conversations where if anybody else gets the number 374 overall player in the class, you think to yourself, oh, nice linebacker, James Laurinaitis. Nice tight end, Keenan Bailey. Nice safety, Matt Guerreri. You think to yourself that. And then when Brian Hartline goes and gets a receiver, you think to yourself, what does Brian know? What does Brian know about Mr. Brock Boyd? So yeah, Brock Boyd, really, really good receiver. Ohio State should feel really good about getting this guy's pledge in the class, especially now that you have 3 receivers in your class. So like Stefan said, the first people that heard this were not on this podcast. The first people that heard it were the people who had the text, 614-350-3315.
Yeah, so that is breaking news in real time. That is the weirdest thing. When I made the joke about flips and stuff like that, I had not seen that text from Steven or the commitment. So also shout out to Steven. He's in Miami texting us about recruiting news. So why don't we do this? Let's take our second break, and then we'll come back and talk some more portal stuff. Give Andrew a chance to break the news here to the world as Ohio State lands a commitment. 4-star, you said he was a 4-star, right? 4-star wide receiver, Brock Boyd, flips from TCU. So we'll come back. We'll talk more portal stuff here on Buckeye Talk. Welcome back again to Buckeye Talk. We're back from our break. Andrew has broken the news. He's written the story. He sent the text. The first thing he did was send a text. 614-350-3315. Once again, Ohio State lands a commitment. 4-star receiver Brock Boyd. Okay, back to the portal discussion. Talking spring portal window. We talked defensive tackle, the needs Ohio State has there. You lead the way now. Where are we going next? What position are we looking at next in the portal?
Yeah. We talked about defensive tackle, and I'm glad we are starting here because I said this at the jump. I'm curious about defensive end. I'm curious if they think they need another defensive end because you have Kenyatta Jackson, you have Caden Kurt, you have Logan George, who flashed, and then I think you start to have questions. And this is something that I think you need the glass slipper to fit a little bit, right? You need the right guy, because I don't think they are going to go, or nor should they go into this portal window thinking we need a defensive end. But I think it should be on their watch list. And that's why I wanted to talk about this now, because Zion Grady is a freshman. And I think if you were to rank freshman contributors, he's up there with players that could play and that could find a role in their freshman season. But he is still just a freshman. Logan George has flashed, but we haven't seen it at Ohio State. CJ Hicks has kind of been this idea of, wow, what happens if this guy hits? He's an all Big Ten level player, but we haven't seen it yet, and he's also playing a new position. So adding a defensive end to me am I crazy, Stefan? Well, for this particular question, am I crazy for suggesting Ohio State, if they find a starter or contributor at defensive end, that's something that they should explore?
No, I don't think it's crazy at all. I don't know if you're going to find a starter, but you have to find, if you do find someone, it's going to be a playable backup, someone who maybe is your number 3 or your number 4. Like you said, Logan George, I think, is good, or will be good. CJ Hicks is still a bit of an idea, but I think there's potential there. And I don't hate the idea of Zion Grady getting some playing time this year, but if you can get a surefire guy. So I think defensive tackle is kind of you got to go get someone, because you do also kind of need bodies, but you do and on top of which you kind of need someone who can come in and play for you. Defensive end is probably, if there's a name out there. I was a little surprised Ohio State didn't go after David Bailey, the edge rusher from Stanford who committed to Texas Tech a little bit ago. I thought maybe that guy would kind of fit some of the mold. Maybe they're more confident in Logan George and CJ Hicks than we are at times, but I don't think you're crazy for mentioning that. If nothing else, I mean, you're kind of 5 deep at defensive end right now. If Logan George, CJ Hicks, and Zion Grady do give you something in 2025, I think you could probably still use one more guy, even if he's the true number 6 guy. I think having one more guy in that room, would it be a bad idea? I will say that's not the direction I thought you were going to go. I thought you were going to go offensive tackle, because Ryan Day said that that's more of a position where they kind of just need bodies. Because I think you're 4 deep at offensive tackle with Ian Moore, Phillip Daniels, Ethan Owenyawa, and Austin Sierreveld. But you lost Josh Simmons, Donovan Jackson, Zen Mahalski, George Fitzpatrick, and Josh Fryer. So you kind of need 1 or 2 more guys in an offensive tackle room just to have bodies, is kind of the vibe I got from Ryan Day. Now, I will say, if there's a good enough defensive tackle, I think that's more important, because you're trying to get potentially a number 3 guy, or a guy who can really get some playing time. I think at offensive tackle, whatever you get, that's not a guy we're going to see play on the field very much, probably at all during his career at Ohio State, but definitely not in 2025. So defensive end, I think if there's a guy there, you get him. Offensive tackle, I think you might just go get anyone that you deem good enough to be like a quote-unquote practice squad player for you.
I actually disagree. I don't think you need an offensive tackle, even if, especially if Austin Sierreveld is just going to play tackle for you. Like, if Sierreveld's going to be your right tackle, and you have Onyanwa, Sierreveld, Daniels, Moore, I don't know, that's pretty good to me. Then you have a top 60, I think it was, recruit in Carter Lowe as your 5th guy. Maybe you have, Deontay Armstrong, or one of the Armstrongs is going to be your other tackle. I don't know. That to me feels like a solid 1 through 6. I don't think that, you're necessarily in a ton of trouble with an injury at tackle. like if Ceraveld goes down or if Anyanwa goes down, I think you're feeling okay with Ian Moore or Daniels or whoever you're going to put in there. And then, frankly, before you got to 5, 6, 7, you're probably saying, okay, Van Sickle's going to start at right guard because Shabola is going to play tackle, right? You're probably doing a little bit of what you did last year. Now, I don't think fans should expect it to turn out like Donovan Jackson, nor do I think our very smart listeners are actually thinking that. Donovan Jackson was a unicorn of a football player who was just so good, and what he did in that playoff run was so special. But that is, to me, your break glass in case of emergency. It's that Tegra Shabola option. So I don't think you need a tackle. I don't think you should prioritize it, because if Ceraveld is indeed a tackle, then I think you're just set. I think you're just okay in your 2 deep. And like for Ohio State, like they lost, Josh Simmons last year, and then Seth McLaughlin did go down, but Zen Mahalski goes down. So you lose 2 tackles. So they really only had to go to their third left tackle option, and even then it was kick somebody out from guard. So I don't think you really even go that far down the depth chart. To me, I look at tackle as one of those positions where it's like, unless you're pulling Paris Johnson out of the portal, I'm not doing it.
Interesting. I don't know. I mean, because Ceraveld is working other places, though.
He is, and that I think that goes to the bigger question. If Ceraveld was a placeholder, then it's definitely more of a conversation. But then it's a conversation of how do you feel about Philip Daniels? Yeah. Because if you think, all right, Daniels is maybe going to need some time, and Ceraveld, the only reason we were playing him at right tackle is because Ceraveld is having a great year, and we're going to start him, and Philip Daniels needs some more time, but we would like to find a tackle and kick Ceraveld into guard. Then you start to get into the conversation of maybe we could use a tackle. But they did just go get 2 of them. And at some point, you kind of have to just say, what we got is what we got. And we're going to trust the guys that we went and got. And I know they were committed under Justin Fry, but Justin Fry is not the only person that signs off on transfer portal guys, right? The position coach is not just the only guy who says, we're taking this player no matter what. So, yeah, I think you're probably set at tackle. I frankly, I think we could have talked about this for a few more positions, and I probably wouldn't have brought up tackle.
Interesting. Okay, what are some other ones then that you think? Because I think at this point, nothing else is really a need. But I think if like something comes up, and I'm not even saying like a starter comes up, like even if it's a guy who's like, oh, this would be a decent piece to add to the depth. First one that comes to mind for me is still safety, because I do think Malik Hartford's going to be good, and I think Jalen McClain is there as well. But we don't exactly know like what Keenan Nelson, what his situation is, and Fahim Delane, as good as we think he is still a freshman. Like, do you maybe try to go get a veteran guy in that room? Like, if there's someone in there that you're just like, okay, he's a veteran, he's been around, he can be our 4th safety. I think that's maybe a position I would circle as. I would circle it and say, don't be surprised if Ohio State gets someone who doesn't play at all in 2025.
Yeah, that to me, I think, is probably next on my list. It was either that or another kind of depth position. Caleb Downs, Malik Hartford, Keenan Nelson, Jalen McClain, Leroy Roker. Those are your veterans. I think having another guy to bridge that gap would be helpful, because Nelson is kind of just a reserve special teams player at this point. I don't think we've really talked about him, in that 2 deep. I think we've seen like Downs and Hartford is probably going to be your starting safety tandem. McClain and Roker is probably your next group. I think having a veteran in that mix to maybe bridge the gap between Fahim Delane, Cody Haddad, and Deshaun Stewart, the 3 freshmen, is probably pretty smart. Keenan Nelson, like I said, I think he's just kind of exclusively a depth guy at this point. So Matt Guerreri's kind of whipping butt on the recruiting trail, for those that follow along, which we hope you all are. But Blaine Bradford's in this class, in the 2026 class. Simeon Caldwell is going to start at safety, and we'll see. But right now, you got those two, and there's a potential for another 5-star in Braylon Womack. He's going to commit in August. Again, I texted that out on Monday. He announced his commitment date, so we still have another 4 months for that. But this safety recruiting class can get really good, but that's not going to happen until 2026, and Caleb Downs is not going to be here in 2026. Caleb Downs is going to be playing for one of a handful of NFL teams. The NFL teams that are not going to be very good this year, he's going to be on one of them. So you need, I think, something in the short term and in the intermediary to kind of just help you fill that group out, because you do have the 3 freshmen, like I said, but that to me, just somebody that can play special teams and somebody that can be your 4th or 5th safety, I think would be just a really nice shot in the arm for a unit that actually, when you look at it, doesn't really have a ton of guys in that group.
And the last one I want to ask you about then too is veteran quarterback. Do you think they should, or do you think they will?
I think they should.
I think they should.
I think they should. This is probably one of the more interesting and also mundane conversations that we're going to have at Buckeye Talk for a while, because Lincoln Keenholz, Julian Say, and Tavian St. Clair. You only got 3 in the room right now, but that group is very young. You have Lincoln Keenholz entering his 3rd year, Julian Say in 2nd, Tavian St. Clair 1st. You also want to avoid the situation where, you're down a quarterback for a week, for a month, for a year, for whatever. And, even if it's Washington, a team that's just kind of middling, or a team that is not very good on your schedule, I'm not sure necessarily early on you want to be walking in there with Tavian St. Clair as your backup. I think adding a Tristan, we've used his name a lot. You weren't here for him. Tristan Gebbia, a veteran. Just let's give this guy the keys and tell him to kind of handle this. There was a game in 2023, Ohio State, Wisconsin. Kyle McCord hurt his ankle. And for those that are listening that remember that game, Wisconsin kind of hung around a little bit. I think it was a game in the second half. They might have tied it or cut it to 3 or something in the second half. I would have to go back and look. But it was a game, and McCord was definitely fighting an injury. And I remember we were talking about it in the press box going, they probably go to Devin Brown, but Gebbia here is not crazy. Because if you go to somebody who just knows what you got, and I think Devin Brown might have even been injured at that time. I forget the specific examples now that I'm remembering this, but basically someone to just put the ship on cruise control would be a nice option, to where you could say, you know what, Tavian, focus on your development. We're not going to ask you to run these kind of reps and run these kind of things. That to me would be a benefit. And frankly, it's kind of a great selling point. If you Stefan, think about it. If you're a veteran quarterback at insert SEC, Big Ten, ACC, Big 12 school here, you're going to be a third guy for the second, third guy. And there's an established starter, and you're not going to start, but you only got 1 year left, or maybe even 2 years of eligibility left. Riding the bench at Ohio State has got to be a little bit better than riding the bench at a lot of other places. That to me is the selling point. I don't think I'm wrong by saying that, am I?
I mean, worst case scenario, you're starting your coaching career.
Exactly. That was what Debbie did.
Yeah. So I think that's what you're looking for. You have to have 4 quarterbacks on the roster. I think having 3 quarterbacks is just not enough. We saw when they were practicing, it just felt like you were missing one more person in that room. So yeah, Gebbia is the perfect example. It just go get someone who's ready to start their coaching career. If they know there's no future in the NFL and not much of a future in college football, come start your coaching career. Come learn from Ryan Day and Billy Fessler and Brian Hartline and whatnot. So I think you have to. That might be another one where I circle and I'm just saying, no matter who it is, you probably go get someone just because I think it's a need when you get down the depth chart a bit. Like you need bodies in that room.
And you still have Mason Maggs. Mason Maggs is on the roster as well. He's a local kid, so it's like, okay, he's been around a while. Is he that guy? Like this is a question that, you know, I guess Ryan Day and Billy Fessler and Brian Hartline have to answer. Is he your veteran? Because if he is, as rosters expand, is that somebody you're interested in having around? Okay, then maybe that's just the answer, and maybe we're just kind of overlooking that. I personally would probably go out and try to get another guy. Now, of course, sometimes, you know, that guy just doesn't exist. Sometimes it's, you know, we're speaking about a hypothetical person. You know, that is the fun part of the transfer portal era. Not just us, but college football podcasts everywhere. They could say, God, wouldn't it be great if, I don't know, the Oklahoma State Cowboys could go out and get a right guard who could start right away? And they're like, you kind of look around and you're like, there just ain't a right guard that's going to come to Oklahoma State. Or, you know, BYU really needs a running back right now. Okay, well, what if Jaden Ott tells you no? Are you going to find somebody in that mix? So it's about fit for both the player and the school, and sometimes that doesn't exist. So we'll see, and that hypothetical person, that hypothetical veteran quarterback who is Tristan Gebbia reincarnated, kind of has to exist for it to work.
Yeah, that's where the spring portal is tough, because you just don't have as many guys, and you don't have as many quality guys typically enter the portal. Obviously, that could be different. We'll keep up with all the portal news, like we've mentioned on this pod a couple times. First place we go when anything breaks is the text line, 614-350-3315. Get a 2-week free trial if you join now, as the portal window is open as you're listening. And it's open through April 25th, and commitments will continue to roll in throughout the country, throughout the college football landscape. We'll be back, Andrew and I, tomorrow, talk a bit of recruiting. You got a little bit of a sneak preview on this pod of what the recruiting pod is going to be like. We'll talk about guys that Andrew's mentioned, like Braylon Womack, Brady Edmonds, a bunch of good players in this upcoming recruiting class for Ohio State. And there's a lot of guys where I've seen some of their film, whether it be on social media or some of the recruiting sites, and you start to get a bit intrigued. So I think we're going to have a fun conversation tomorrow talking about this recruiting. And then Stephen will be back for Friday's pod, I believe, and then we'll roll into the weekend. So get the text, 614-350-3315. From Andrew Gillis, I'm Stefan Krajisnik. Thanks for listening to Buckeye Talk.